So, what the heck is Cloudware? It isn't some piece of AI software designed to fully automate the preparation and storage of an accountant's working paper file in the cloud and facilitate collaboration between people working remotely. Though that might make good marketing copy. It will make it easier for accountants working remotely to collaborate with others in the preparation of working paper files for small business. It might even work for some large businesses, though the largest companies I've ever used it for are mid-sized, high-growth companies that we lovingly call unicorns these days. It does involve software, but everyone has that software already anyway. It combines professional spreadsheet software like Excel, Google Sheets, or LibreOffice Calc, and cloud-based storage, OneDrive, Google Drive, DROPBOX, or CITRIX files like we use. Instead of artificial intelligence, it involves actual intelligence. In short, it's the application of software tools that we already have to meet a simple and recurring information need that every business has.
Cloudware had its origins in the manual working paper files used by professional accountants in the recent past, as late as the 1980s and 90s. In those days, we needed to put together working paper files that were kept in a central file room, even in small local accounting offices. Accountants used columnar paper instead of spreadsheets initially, and that's probably where spreadsheets got their name, and total columns with adding machines and then later electronic calculators. While this may seem archaic today, accounting technicians then could be surprisingly efficient. What's more, they had complete control over their system, which meant that they soon internalized the accounting algorithm. When Caseware International developed their commercial working paper application in the early 1990s, the internet was still in its infancy. Most small offices had filing cabinets and local area networks that they managed themselves. Caseware allowed small firms to share working paper files amongst staff fairly easily. It provided a great deal of control over the design and structure of the working paper file, and even came with its own formatting and reporting tool, as well as a rudimentary programming language. From our perspective, though, Caseware as an application has a number of disadvantages. First, the reporting system and programming function required firms to learn a unique programming language that was only useful within that system. In our view, it makes more sense to invest in learning the intricacies of contemporary word processing and spreadsheet programs that are not only more powerful, but have much broader application. Second, the application was designed when the internet was in its infancy. It relied to a great extent on local area networks and/or sophisticated IT management locally. These days, the risk of managing your own IT is actually much greater than the risks associated with outsourcing to a credible content management system in the cloud, typically referred to as CMS systems. These systems have the resources to protect your data more effectively and at a much lower cost. Third, file sharing was initially reliant on local proximity and was less convenient and less powerful than contemporary cloud-based CMS systems. Cloudware addresses all of these disadvantages by combining the capabilities of professional quality office productivity software and professional cloud-based CMS systems in one single place.
The layout of this tab might remind the user of the old-fashioned manual spreadsheet that it's based on, but only if the user is old enough to remember the days before Google or social media. Let's start by looking at the top left-hand side. Here we have the company name and the year-end or period-end date. In larger companies, we might prepare a working trial balance at the end of each month, but that would be too much work and too expensive for most small businesses. Next, we'll look at the columns from left to right. We start with the company's chart of accounts in the first two columns. The next column, column number 3, contains the opening balance for the year. In a small business that uses accounting software, hopefully an online package like QuickBooks Online, Xero, or Wave, we simply take the trial balance from the online accounting software. For many of our smallest businesses, though, who don't use accounting software at all, they may use billing software like FreshBooks or Bill.com, but they don't do the bookkeeping themselves. For them, it often makes more sense to get their CPA or bookkeeper to write up their books once a year. First of all, they aren't any good at it and won't understand the results anyway. And it's often harder to clean up and repair a messy set of accounting records than it is to get it done right once a year by a pro. For a small business that doesn't intend to grow quickly, this approach can work indefinitely. For a startup looking to grow, this approach may work for a few years before they get to a point that it's simply too cumbersome. If the client or business uses a working trial balance once a year in order to facilitate filing their taxes, we can simply paste the balance sheet values from the prior column into the opening balance column for the current year into a new copy of the spreadsheet. That's important because you want to keep last year's working trial balance sacrosanct. Of course, we don't need to copy the values from the income statement accounts because we close the income statement accounts to retained earnings at the end of each year. Before you take the prior year data and post it to the opening balance column, you'll have to copy the final column data to the prior column. Logically, last year's ending balances become this year's prior column. So we start with the prior year, then record the current year's transactions in the AJEs tab, or adjusting entries. If you're feeling a little overwhelmed at this point, you probably aren't ready for this course right now. Before you can use Cloudware, you have to understand the theory behind double entry bookkeeping and a little bit of accounting theory. You should probably take an introductory accounting course first.
Next, let's explore the rest of the main working TB tab. Once the opening balance has been updated, the accountant enters adjusting entries in the AJEs tab. The data from the AJEs tab is posted automatically to the adjusting entries columns in the appropriate debit or credit column. The final column updates automatically. So, we now have the chart of accounts and the opening balances as a starting point. We create adjusting entries in the AJEs tab, which updates the working trial balance. The final column simply adds the adjusting entries to the opening balances. The prior column is easily visible to allow for comparison. The next column, Working Paper Reference, contains the references to working papers in the working paper file, which is stored in your content management system in the cloud. Next, let's explore the Jiffy columns and the general index of financial information. This information requirement was introduced many years ago by the Canada Revenue Agency. Corporations must now file standardized accounting information with their corporate tax returns. While it may seem like a bit of a pain, it does allow us to retrieve financial information by business type for most Canadian businesses. This is not only useful for policymakers, but also by businesses trying to understand the Canadian economic environment. The first tab in our workbook contains the CI equivalent of our working trial balance. After the adjusting entries have been entered, we simply refresh the pivot table. Now we are ready to post the values into Schedule 100 and Schedule 125 of the corporate tax return.
Over the years, I've used other working paper solutions, but as I moved to a remote working model, I found I liked the flexibility of using EXCEL and CITRIX files, which we're using anyway. The functions and formulas I learned developing and simplifying the model were much more useful in my practice, and help me extract and manipulate data more effectively outside the working paper application. It does require that users internalize the fundamental accounting algorithm, but that's actually a desirable outcome of any training course. While I originally developed the application for collaboration with staff in the Philippines, I now believe that I had an unhealthy attachment to the leverage model. But that's another story.